So we've all experienced it at some level. I'm talking about anxiety. Some sources suggest that there's been an increase in mental health disorders due to the pandemic by as much as 30%. And if you speak to some psychologists and some doctors, they may tell you it's as much as a 50% increase. There's more talk at the moment about anxiety and mental illness than any time I can remember in my whole life. And we've all experienced it to some level. The question is, when we start worrying about the future and we have anxiety, what will stop our thinking from becoming like a domino? So that we don't snowball into panic and feelings of helplessness and despair. Well, the good news is that Jesus understands our anxieties, and what he teaches today can totally transform how we respond to anxiety. Well, so far in Matthew, Jesus is establishing his kingdom. It's an upside-down kingdom that we enter into by trusting Jesus. And in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus teaches his disciples how to pray for his kingdom to come. We saw that last week. And in chapter 6, Jesus says we don't need to worry about what we say in order to have our prayers answered. We saw that last week. Why? Chapter 6, verse 8 says, "Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him." The idea of God knowing what we need appears again in our passage today in verse 32. And it forms the foundation of everything else Jesus says in our passage today. And the first thing Jesus teaches is that God knows what you need, so give him your heart. If you've got the passage open, look from verse 19. Jesus begins by saying that every would-be disciple or follower of Jesus is faced with three choices in verse 19 through to verse 24. A choice between two treasures in verse 19 to 21, one on earth and one in heaven. A choice between being a blind person or someone who can see in verses 22 to 23. And a choice between two masters in verse 24, God and money. Now let's begin by what Jesus isn't saying. Jesus is not saying that you can't have any personal belongings. Secondly, he's not saying you can't save up for things that you need, like food and a place to live. The Bible says that a Christian who doesn't provide for their family is worse than an unbeliever. Thirdly, he's not saying you can't enjoy the things you own. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17, Paul writes that God richly provides us with everything for us to enjoy. So he's not saying you can't have personal belongings, save up for things you need, and you can't enjoy things. So what is Jesus saying? Have a closer look with me at verse 19. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. Jesus is telling his disciples not to buy and collect things selfishly. At the heart of our selfish desire for material possessions is coveting. Now, when we did our 10 Commandments series, we talked about coveting. It's a desire for things that God hasn't given you. And it leads to a discontentment about the things that you don't have. And when we see our friends, when we read magazines, when we scroll Instagram, and we think to ourselves, if only I had that, then I'd be happy. Well, that's coveting. So we justify spending our money and our time and our energy all on ourselves. And we fail to consider how we can use these things for the good of the kingdom and for loving our brothers and sisters in Christ, caring for those around us. And so Jesus reminds us of how pointless it is to spend our lives, our money, and our thinking on these things, because he says, moth and rust destroy, and thieves break in and steal. Now, we've all experienced this. You might not literally have had someone break in and steal or literally had something rust, but we've all experienced it. For example, a friend of mine, here's a picture. He's building he built a gaming laptop, a gaming PC. Should be coming up on the next slide. The cooling system alone cost $4,000. Just the cooling, right? The two graphics cards are over $2,000 each. He's got two of them. The cooling system broke and water went all over the computer, right? probably close to $15,000, like wrecked up. And also the two graphics cards, by the time it got fixed, they're now outdated. There's newer ones, right? Okay, another example, Pip and I, when our car was being repaired, the hire car was a Mercedes, right? So what did we do with that Mercedes? Like, yeah, this is great, this is life. We drove over a pole and practically rid it off. There's so much damage underneath that car right there. Hands up if you've ever cracked a screen on your phone before. That's like 90% of people. It's just disappointing when it happens, right? Why spend your life, guys, Jonathan? Why spend your lives on things that will only ever eventually disappoint? Instead, in verse 20, Jesus says we ought to be laying up treasures in heaven. Now, what are treasures in heaven? Well, treasures in heaven, anything we do that has eternal significance. This would include caring and providing for the needs of brothers and sisters in Christ, sharing the good news of Jesus with our friends and family, knowing that those who trust in Jesus are safe forever. No thief can steal them away from heaven, neither can sickness either. And the key point Jesus is making is there in verse 21. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Notice it didn't say where your heart is, your treasure will also be. Our hearts can be influenced by what we spend our time and our money on. That's the point in verse 22 to verse 23. When we fix our eyes on worldly things, then our eyes will focus our hearts down towards things on earth. And it will make us blind to God and the things that really matter. But if we spend our time and our money on God's kingdom, then our eyes will focus our hearts upward towards heavenly treasures. Jesus summarizes these two ways of living in verse 24. He says, you cannot serve God and money. People have tried, but you can't do it. What you treasure, you serve because your desires get focused on it and your desires start to rule you. And that thing that you serve, well, you need to give it 100% commitment. There's no sitting on the fence with God. Do not be deceived. You cannot serve two masters. Sorry, that doesn't stop working. Just, is that working? Hello? Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, it seems to be on. I can just talk, and if that comes on, it'll come on. So I want to say to all of you, guys at the back, come on. You need to decide now if you're going to serve money. If you're going to live for things of this world, well, if you do that, you will start making decisions to sacrifice Spark for friends, parties, or study. That's what's going to start happening, and you can watch it amongst your friends. And in the future, you'll sacrifice going to church when you've got a job for a promotion. And finally, well, you will end up sacrificing a home in heaven for a nice house in a nice neighborhood. Now, it's not that you can't have these things, but it's when they come first. They become your priority. So the decision you make now, who you decide to serve now, will determine your destiny. Here's a quote. Someone helpfully put it this way. Sow a thought, reap an action. Sow an act, reap a habit. Sow a habit, you reap a character. Sow a character, you reap a destiny. Well, so far we've learned that God knows what you need, so give him your heart. The second thing is, God knows what you need, so don't be anxious. 3 times in the next section, between verse 25 and 34, Jesus repeats the phrase, do not be anxious, or do not worry. Now, anxiety on one level, it's just a physiological response to one's natural environment. It's our fight or flight response to something we think is a threat. So why do you think Jesus says we shouldn't be anxious? In verse 31, Jesus says, do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? Now, if you live for material possessions, guys, money, iPhones, clothes, shoes, etc., you'd start to worry about God, right? For deep down, we all know we're going to face him on Judgment Day. But if you serve God, you don't need to worry about money and material possessions. We'll explain this a little bit more. All of us feel uncertain at times about how God will provide for us, right? And even if you haven't experienced that generally, COVID-19 has thrown that on the cards. In a recent survey, people between the age of 18 and 25 were asked whether they've been in mental distress over the past week. Here is the comparison between 2017 and 2019. It's gone up 3 times this year. For those whose parents have lost their job, we might be wondering, will I need to change home or change school? For those of us in upper years of high school, we might be anxious, will our marks be affected? Will that affect my grades? Will that affect ATAR, etc.? How can we possibly trust that everything will be okay? Well, the answer is there in the next verse, in verse 32. For the Gentiles seek after all these things, but your heavenly Father knows that you need them. God knows what you need. This is the same thing Jesus said right before the Lord's Prayer, where he said, your Father knows what you need before you ask him. This means your heavenly Father is not only able to provide everything you need, it's not what you want, you need, but he is willing. Imagine if you fail an exam, right? And you have a week to resit and you really need help, and you walk out of that exam room, you see your principal rushing around organizing teachers. Then you see a grumpy teacher who always gives you a detention for talking to your friends. Then imagine you see your really smart friend who's sitting at a table studying, and they look up and they give you a big smile and they invite you over. Who of these 3 people is going to help you in your study for your exam resit? It's your smart and your friendly friend, of course. Well, God is like that, but better. God is both able and willing to provide for all your needs. And God illustrates this through the passage by pointing us to the birds and the lilies. The birds don't store up in big barns. They haven't studied really hard or got into the best uni, and yet God feeds them. And the flowers don't toil or spin, and yet God clothes them more extravagantly than Israel's greatest, richest king, Solomon. The point is this: if God feeds the birds and clothes the lilies, which are of much less value, can we not trust God to take care of the ones for whom he sent Jesus to die? And then Jesus gently challenges us at the end, saying, "O you of little faith." Because the root of anxiety and worry is a lack of faith. Now, I'm not talking about anxiety in terms of COVID and things, but material anxiety. We worry as if God is not in control and as if God cannot be trusted with managing our life wisely. But because God knows what we need and nothing takes him by surprise, we needn't have a fortune teller mindset that thinks we know what's going to happen in the future and it's always going to be bad. We needn't have that attitude. So often the things we worry about don't happen anyway. And then we're worried for no reason at all. We can trust God with today and let God be concerned about tomorrow. Now, I want to say, if you are struggling with anxiety, it doesn't mean that you're not a Christian. In fact, there are some forms of anxiety that are good. Like when Paul says he has anxiety that Christians keep trusting Jesus in 2 Corinthians. That's a good anxiety. It is not a sin to feel anxiety during a pandemic. It's not a sin to wonder what in the world is going on right now. It's not whether we have anxiety, but it's what we do with it. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7, we read, "Cast all your anxieties on him because he cares for you." And he has proven that he cares for you by sending his son to die on the cross to take away your sin. And he has promised to work every circumstance for your good. That's what we see in Romans 8:28. We know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, that we might be conformed to the image of his son. No one is more influential in your life in creating anxiety than you are, because no one talks to you more than you do. We need to preach to ourselves that God knows what we need most, and he is working in every situation to provide it for us. So we needn't worry about the future. But we can't do this alone. Now, I'm sure some of us are struggling with anxiety in this room right now. And so we need to ask each other genuinely, how are we going with anxiety and depression? And we need to be prepared to listen and to pray for them and remind them of what we've learned this week and to follow them up next week. Well, so far we've learned that God knows what we need, so give him your heart and don't be anxious. Thirdly, God knows what you need, so seek his kingdom. What we see in these verses is that we are all seekers. In verse 32, Gentiles seek after worldly things, believers seek first the kingdom. There are only two goals in life. Now imagine your time and your energy, investing your time and energy into worldly security and possessions, whether it be food or clothing, or investing in God's kingdom. Now, if you're a Christian, then the things you spend your most time thinking about and the most things you spend your energy on shouldn't be your ATAR. It shouldn't be K-pop. It shouldn't be Instagram. It shouldn't be boyfriends and girlfriends or talking about that. It shouldn't be Netflix. It's not saying any of these things are bad, but you should desire more than anything to prepare yourself and others for the kingdom of Jesus by trusting in him. And as you do this, God says he knows what you need, and all these worldly things like food and drink and clothing will be provided for you. When I was at uni, I became a Christian and I made a decision to live first for the kingdom of God. And so I decided the best thing for me would be to go to Bible college. And by the end of Bible colleges, I had no money in my bank account. But I was seeking first the kingdom. What is God going to do? And in that very point in time, God provided from my grandpa's trust fund a car so we could get around. And provided from my mum, who sold her property in the country, an apartment. And where was that apartment that we bought 3 years ago? Strathfield. I didn't know I was going to get a job here. It's right in between my church job and my uni job. How amazing is God's provision? God knew what I needed, and even though I did have anxieties at times, God showed me he knew what I needed as I seek first the kingdom. And he will provide for you if you seek first his kingdom this week. So let's trust God this week that he will provide our needs as we seek first his kingdom.